Hello to Williams alumni everywhere. Did you know that during economic downturns, about 84% of adults experience the emotional distress of anxiety or depression, and mental distress often affects physical health? Now add racial injustice, social inequity, a pandemic, and remote work with 4 people on Wi-Fi. It's estimated that 75% of adults need mental care services at some point, but 90% go untreated or end treatment prematurely. This number is even higher for people of color. I am Michele Rogers, class of '79, proud parent of Akila 2004, a member of Williams Trustee Board and the Bicentennial team. I'm delighted to welcome you today and honored to learn from this very talented panel about racial disparities in mental health care and wellness, co-hosted by WBAN and WAAAN. This is one of many events commemorating the 200th anniversary of the founding of the Williams College Society of Alumni, the oldest alumni association in North America and quite possibly the world. We're using this year to celebrate and grapple with our past, to examine our present, and to imagine our future. Together, we envision a more inclusive society where all alumni feel they belong. We chose Williams, so we're united in our commitment to a liberal arts education, to lifelong learning, and especially to each other and to the college. Today's very knowledgeable moderator, Dr. Michael Gadson, also class of 1979, is a psychiatrist, founded a clinic, and is a graduate of the University of Connecticut Medical School. Michael completed a rotation in internal medicine, a residency in general psychiatry at the Hartford Institute of Living, and a fellowship in child psychiatry at Georgetown University. Michael, so great to see you, my brother.
Thank you, Michele, and thank you for that introduction. Michele, a few reminders before we get started with the program. And for those out in the audience, if you have questions during today's talk, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen at any time. We'll have a dedicated time for Q&A toward the end of the program, but you can submit your questions as you think of them. Also, please reserve the chat as a space to engage with the community and share any reflections or comments you may have. Remember to select all panelists and all attendees in the chat dropdown so that your message can be seen at all. And lastly, please note that we will be recording today's session. What I'd like to start out recognizing that May is Mental Health Month, recognized here in the United States, but also wanted to share with you my thoughts on, and many others' thoughts about the COVID-19 pandemic and how it has exposed what were existing disparities in the mental health system of the United States. In general, 18% of the US population have a diagnosable mental illness. Mental illness is one of the leading causes of disability, and minorities often bear a disproportionately high burden of disability resulting from mental illness. Rates of depression are lower in Blacks, 25%, Hispanics, 20%, and whites, 35%. However, it's more persistent in minority populations. Lastly, the lack of cultural understanding by healthcare providers may contribute to underdiagnosis or misdiagnosis of mental illness in people from racially, ethnically diverse populations. And that's from the American Psychiatric Association's report on mental health disparities in diverse populations. The data that they gave was pre-COVID, and I hope we can explore some of the issues, barriers, and challenges of this mental health in the time of COVID and beyond. And we have a very diverse and talented group of panelists. We're joined by Vidisha Patel, class of 1985, and a member of the Williams Trustee Board. Adisha works as a licensed mental health therapist, helping young adults and families help themselves and strengthening relationships, building self-esteem, and reducing stress and anxiety. After graduating from Williams with a major in art history and Asian studies, Vidisha spent a number of years working in finance, both in the US and in India, her country of birth. She went on to receive an MBA from Columbia University. Vidisha's current work stems from a career shift made after realizing the importance of passion and purpose in her work combined with a long-time desire to help and support others in need. She went back to school and completed a doctorate in psychology prior to opening her practice. She lives in Florida with her husband and is the mother of two East, years 18 and 19. Also with us is Bernice Hutchinson, class of 1981, Deputy Secretary of the Maryland Department of Aging. Bernice is responsible for administering all aging programs and services for the state of Maryland. She advocates to protect the rights and quality of life of older adults. Prior to joining the Department of Aging, she served as a senior policy advisor for the nation's state government leaders in aging, while also educating the members of Congress. She has crossed the country and appeared before groups in 48 states. She has authored technical work on diversity issues in aging and served as a consultant and contributor on several scholarly texts and articles, including Nora Jean Levin's bestseller, How to Care for Your Aging Parents. She's also the wife of my college roommate, Gary Hutchinson. Finally, we have Michaela Kearney, class of 2015. Michaela is a psychiatric nurse practitioner out of Boston and a DNP MBA candidate at Johns Hopkins University. Following the death of her brother by suicide, Michaela has dedicated her life to mental health through her career and advocacy work. She specializes in cultural competency and raising awareness of the various ways mental health present in minority populations and communities. She has been featured in an award-winning mental health documentary and has shared her story through numerous speaking engagements, including the Milken Institute's 2021 Future of Health Summit to help eliminate the stigma surrounding mental health. We're so pleased to have them with us today. Let's get to the heart of our conversation. For the panel, what I'd like to ask, first of all, is what was it about this particular topic that led you to participate in this webinar? And if we can start with Bernice, would you share with us your thoughts?
Thank you so much, Michael. I'd be delighted to do that. About 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And in getting that diagnosis, it wasn't long before I realized that this was not just a fight about cancer. It was also, there were also so many things surrounding me: diet, exercise, and trying to get up to a place of better understanding the total body, that I realized that there were some mental health issues that I needed to address. Mental health issues that stemmed back to as far as 1977, when I first put my things together and rode to Williamstown, Massachusetts, 1 week after the death of my mother, which happened exactly a year before that, the death of my father. I came to Williams with one goal in mind, and that was to succeed. I didn't think that I should show grief. I didn't think that I was depressed. I didn't think that there was a mental health component to my journey at Williams. So I tucked everything in, and I just wanted to be normal. I wanted to appear to be just like all of my fellow freshmen joining the campus. So I hid it and I pressed it down, and I became very good at it. And clearly, because more than 40 years later, I then had to face this for the very first time through my cancer journey.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Bernice. Very, very moving. Vidisha, can you share what brought you to this topic in this webinar?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Michael. My journey to this area of work is actually quite, has some similarities to Bernice's journey. It started with loss as well. I was 14 when my mother passed away. And as you had said earlier in the introduction, I was born in India, but my family came to the US when I was quite young. A very sort of traditional immigrant family. My father was an engineer, my mother was a physician. And that cultural background, we were very Indian at home. And obviously I was trying to be very American at school. We really didn't talk too much about feelings or emotions that were sad. So when my mother passed away, it was just assumed that we would carry on as normal. And I too arrived at Williams thinking that that's just the way that it was. And one never really talked about it. And I tried continuously to just fit in. And it was compounded because when I was at Williams in the early years, I think there were only one or two other Indians in the class, maybe a couple of other South Asians, but a very small number. So there wasn't even the connection, the cultural connection as well to aid in the process of grief if there was such a thing. And then after I left Williams, I had a pivotal moment in when I was 30 and I had moved to Colorado with my husband, and I happened to be in a bookstore walking up the stairs to the second level, and I came across a book that was called Motherless Daughters. And after about 40 minutes of sitting on the stairs, reading this book and having completely soaked it with my tears, I realized that the feelings I was feeling were shared by many other people, and that it wasn't normal to keep them all inside. And I think that really inspired me to think about ways that I could help other people explore their emotions and express their emotions in healthier ways, and just connect with others, and especially adding in the cultural piece as well, because I've come to learn over the years that in the culture that I was brought up in, women especially were told things like, you just have to carry on, your father needs you, your brother needs you, etc., forgetting that I may need somebody as well. And then this was further compounded because I lost my brother as well in the process of getting my doctorate to a cancer diagnosis. And so that just reinforced further my desire to spread the word and help other people.
And thank you for sharing that. That's powerful as well. Michaela, you wanna tell us about your interest in participating in this webinar and what brought you to mental health?
Absolutely, yeah. My journey with mental health started when I was 13. I was coming home from school one day, and instead I found my brother Marshall after he had taken his life. Prior to that, I had never thought about mental health or suicide, and then it was pretty much all I could think about. And in the subsequent years of my teen years, as well as my beginning years at Williams College, I dealt with significant symptoms of PTSD while also trying to grapple with the loss of my brother in such a taboo way, because back in 2006, we didn't talk about suicide, especially not in the Black community. So I decided to dedicate my life to helping others with this, as well as advocating for mental health in an effort to prevent other families from having to go through what I went through with my own family. And as a result, I've been able to adequately grieve and process my own brother's passing, to feel like his death was not in vain, and there's a reason why, my family and I are here doing what we are doing.
Incredible. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Given the times that we're in, how do you think COVID, we all know that COVID-19 has had a disproportionate effect on minority and disadvantaged communities. Has this brought the topic of mental health to the foreground, or does it continue to remain in the shadows?
Michael, I think, this is Bernice, I think that COVID has created a sudden worldwide health social, and economic disruption. The suddenness of COVID, I think people remember the day that they were asked to pack their bags in their offices and leave immediately. And it reminds us of the day of the towers falling in New York, 9/11. There was not a lot of certainty. And then with little warning, we were catapulted, I think, most of us, into an incredibly tight sphere. We were quarantined. Many people lost jobs. There was limited physical access to others, and sickness and death of family members and friends and acquaintances. And it didn't take long before that fateful day that we were all sitting, probably doing one of three things: eating, watching movies, or trying to telework, that on May 25th, many people around the world witnessed the death of George Floyd. And for so many people, I think particularly Black people, it evoked feelings that were centuries old of trauma. Stories have been passed down. The inability to move forward or to climb out of disadvantaged communities, inability to solve just that really complex equation of why Black people were brought here in the first place and why things keep changing, but the more they change, they look exactly the same for some, for many. People left the safe environments and took to the streets so they could breathe. And I think it was a clarion call to mental health as well as to racism in America. A new equity conversation emerged. So I think where there is trauma, there is an impact on mental health. Thank you.
Can I read a statement that I found from a therapist by the name of Vladimir Calixte? It was in Mental Health News in August of 2020. And it said, COVID-19 has given the Black community permission to seek therapy as the world tries to process this pandemic. There's a decrease in stigma and an increase in Black patients reaching out. We are collectively grieving the loss of loved ones, our jobs, our way of life, and dealing with feelings of uncertainty and isolation, which kind of speaks to much of what you were saying, Bernice. Vidisha, could you respond? What are your thoughts about the impact of COVID-19?
I would add to what Bernice has said, that has extended to much of the population in terms of removing the stigma of mental health challenges. I work with a lot of college students, and I found that working remotely with them opened up a new world where they felt a little bit freer to talk. It sort of opened up the trauma that we have seen in society in this country. I think sort of opened up wounds that people didn't know that they had. And so I found myself having conversations with young people that are much bigger than I would ever have envisioned having. By the same token, it's also been difficult because a lot of these young people are in situations that are not comfortable for them. Immigrant families, first generation families in this country have had a lot of fear. I had some undocumented students that were constantly anxious and hypervigilant because they didn't know what was going to happen early on in this pandemic. And they were not in spaces where they necessarily have the privacy to have a conversation. So we would have to be creative as to how we could do it. But I think as a general rule, it really helped people see that, we're all suffering and we all have a variety of suffering, and it's okay that we can talk about it and we can get help.
Right. All right, Michaela, you wanna? What are your thoughts?
Excellent points made by everyone. I think what I would add is the circumstances of COVID essentially highlighted things that were already present before. For example, prior to the pandemic, America was already in a mental health crisis. Suicide rates have been up since the 90s and steadily rising. However, people actually recognizing that there were mental health concerns, that they didn't have the coping skills. We had a number of tactics to avoid our mental health, and COVID forced us to all feel those feelings and find new ways to deal with them. Similarly, in terms of Black lives, we have been killed for years. We know that has always been a thing. However, because of the circumstances of COVID, everyone was sitting and watching George Floyd unfold in front of us. We couldn't escape it from the media, from our phones, from conversations. It was always present. And as a result of those circumstances, again, we were no longer able to avoid it. And it really forced people to really take a hard look at what we were doing and try to fix this or make substantial changes.
Thank you so much for your insight. Bernice, when it comes to mental health across the lifespan, you have a unique perspective. Can you help us understand how it affects people, especially the aging and the barriers they face to care?
I do. I have a bird's eye view of the world of aging. I think not many people know that I was left on the doorstep of an elderly couple when I was 1 day old, and that has forever shaped my journey. I was interested in aging at Williams and have dedicated my entire professional career to it. I think everybody on this panel and certainly in the audience realize that America is aging. Today, we have more than 46 million older adults that are 65 and over. But maybe you don't know that by 2050, that number is expected to grow and reach 90 million. That's incredible growth in such a short period of time. And so with the onset of COVID, I think we see older adults facing a lot of instability, food insecurity. At its peak in the state of Maryland, we were serving home delivered meals to 500% more of the people we served on a daily basis. Routines were upended, social lives curtailed, and limited access to family and friends and caregivers. So if you think about this from the standpoint of older Black adults, you see what we call in the aging field as a triple jeopardy at play. You have the age, you have the minority status, and you have morbidity or multiple health disparities. So COVID-19 brought all of these challenges into full view. And as a result, for the first time, we were looking at not only how we could help people do better at home, but how do we ease their anxiety, their depression, and other mental health challenges that they were now for the very first time willing to open up and speak about, as one of the panelists said, opening wounds. So if you look at any generation, not just the older adult generation, I think you can apply the challenges to that particular generation and what it's trying to cope with, and recognize that being confined and changing routine and the fear of the unknown about the future has brought us into a new space. Maybe the numbers haven't changed for mental health, but I think we're certainly looking at this a lot differently.
Thank you so much. Wow, that's a lot of information to digest. Thank you. Vidisha, what do you see as some of the barriers to Asian and Asian Americans receiving and even accepting mental health care?
So I think a lot of that just stems culturally from how we were raised, and I can speak primarily to South Asians because that's my personal experience. It's a culture of family, not unlike the Black community. I mean, we grew up in joint family situations. We grew up with our grandparents. I have lots of memories of sleeping on the floor while my grandmother slept in my bed when she would stay with us for 3-4 months at a time. And so with that kind of family situation, we always kept whatever was happening within the family, we kept it to ourselves. So if someone was having a problem, a mental health challenge, it was never broadcast to the outer world. It was resolved, or seemingly resolved, within the family, the greater family unit. And so that to me is a big barrier for mental health therapy. And I've discovered in my private practice that though I work with a lot of young people, and there are a lot of young Asians and Asian Americans in the community where I live, relatively speaking, I would rarely have them come to my practice because families were afraid. It's a smallish town, and families were afraid of who else would be there, who would see them, and then they would worry about being considered sick in a way that was not appropriate. But with COVID, what I've also noticed is an uptick in that community coming for therapy, because I think situations are just getting beyond what parents can handle, and we've been separated. We're not able to be with our greater family, so we can't rely on the other generations or the relatives for support. So I think we're slowly breaking through those cultural barriers, but to me, those are the biggest ones.
Culture plays a huge role. When I remember being in Nigeria through in the 80s, and how if you were diagnosed as having a mental illness, the family kept it very quiet, because if people found out, what they would say is that would be the end of your line. And so no one would want to marry or be involved with anyone who had a mental illness. And culture does play a huge role. I think even within the Black community as well, is solving our problems, some level of mistrust, various sorts of things that are culturally specific. So it's very important to look at that. Michaela, I had a question about, again, the barriers to mental health. And could you say something about the role of cultural competency in eroding some of those barriers to mental health?
Absolutely. So research has shown that having a strong therapeutic alliance, that is the rapport you have with your provider, statistically increases your treatment success rates. However, less than 3% of the American Psychological Association are Black providers. So 9 times out of 10, you are going to get a non-Black provider. Now, for us, historically, there is a great mistrust at the hand of non-Black providers, because you are subject to further racism, mistreatment, misdiagnosis, and just a general lack of understanding in terms of how your cultural experience manifests in your physical and your mental health. So as a result, oftentimes, if you can get past the barriers of not having access to adequate services in terms of insurance or finances, or even get around the stigma or the lack of psychoeducation in the Black community, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be very hard to find a provider that you can really alliance yourself with, and therefore you may not have as good treatment results. And that can further perpetuate the stigma that Black mental health is just not something that we can achieve in terms of success.
Awesome. That therapeutic alliance, that's what you're talking about. Yeah, that's the key, that fit between the person getting help and the person providing the help is key.
And, Michael, I just wanted to add one thing
please.
To Michaela. Just that historic conversation in the Black community about strength. We're strong. We pray it out. We can handle anything.
Right.
And that we just don't talk about it is running in some strange sort of positioning with fear and just not the acknowledgement of a true understanding of what mental health is. I mean, people in the Black community are likely to say, used to, and certainly it's generational. Older adults say, well, I'm not crazy. And, that would be sort of the
Oh,
way
yeah.
that you would come at this conversation, that mental health equals crazy.
Right.
And so these are some of the things that through cultural competency, hopefully we can get to a higher ground in terms of exposing people to resources and supports.
And I think more conversations like this, more discussions like this, opening up about your own experiences with mental illness, certainly it can be life-changing for someone who hears that as well.
Michael, I would also add that where I work, I've worked in the school system with high school teen parents, and a lot of them are from the minority communities where I live. And what I've noticed is it takes more time speaking to that therapeutic alliance. And,
Yes.
and so when you take the time ahead of time to build the trust, then it is possible to work across cultures.
Yes.
And so that's just something to keep in mind.
I think trust. I spent a lot of time, been practicing psychiatry for 30 years or more. And I spent a lot of time developing trust with people. It's, strengthening that alliance with each visit. And it's amazing how people are willing to share in an environment where they feel they're not being judged. They can trust the care that they're receiving and trust the level of competence of the care that they're receiving as well. I have one last thought and last question I'd like to ask. In preparation for this webinar, as we did our run-throughs and as we gotten to talk with one another, we came to realize we came to Williams from different cultural, social, and emotional experiences as well as loss. Are there things that the college can do to validate and support students, especially minority students with mental health issues? What do you think?
Well, I definitely think that Williams has come a long way. I have certainly been a part of other webinars in the audience and hearing the concerns about modernizing mental health services. And so I do want to applaud the college for making great strides in that area. But I sort of look back at a 1977 young girl stepping onto campus for the first time, investing 4 years of life. And if there had been some way of recognizing grief and anxiety and depression, not just through the lens of loss, but also through the lens that, back then and still today, when you see one of us, there tends to be that oversimplification that we're all coming from the same place. So there's so many things to tuck in to consider yourself normal coming to a Williams, whether you are concerned that you don't fit in financially, you don't fit in because of your gender or because of your other social interests and your abilities that might not be in line with what's considered traditional. I think the college is on the right path, and it should continue to explore kind of that entry point for students and building that relationship and that trust to get students to get the help that they need.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments, Adisha?
I would add, as what Bernice said, that Williams has come a long way. I've had the good fortune of being able to hear some of the conversations with the Integrative Wellness Center and to learn a little bit about the mental health services that are offered. And as I think back to 1981, when I came onto the Williams campus, there was more a sense of fear that you really couldn't express your emotions. Part of it, of course, I'm sure was coming from me and my cultural background and what I thought was okay. But there was also a sense of you had to look like you fit in. There was a pressure to be a part of this community in a certain way, and it wasn't very clear where one could go to get support. I ended up working with Peer Health, and that was, to me, that was the opening of a space that the college provided. And now there are so many organizations and opportunities for students to engage, but there's still more work to be done. And I think that we need to continue creating a trusting community where everyone feels comfortable expressing whoever they are and from whatever place they come from.
Absolutely, absolutely. Michaela, you have some thoughts to share with us?
Sure, yeah. Normalization is what I'm hearing from both, which is huge. Absolutely, we want to make this conversation very commonplace. I also think once you bring the conversation up, helping them out on the other side of, okay, this is who you are. What struggles come with that? How can we help aid you in those struggles? Because a lot of times I see people finally come to terms of, okay, I have depression, I have anxiety. Great, I don't know what to do with it though. Okay, here are some techniques, here are some breathing exercises.
Right.
Recognizing what we call your protective factors, that can vary based on your culture. So for the Black community, for example, religion, having a strong community aspect, those are two big protective factors for us. So making sure that we have access to those on campus. When I was on campus, I was part of the mental health committee, and we did an event, I don't know if it's still going on, but it's called You Are Not Alone. And it would happen twice a semester, where we would have guest speakers, guest students who would come up and they would share their stories about whatever struggle they were going through. And it basically came to fruition in the idea of, you are not alone. What you're going through, I am also going through it as well.
Right.
And again, it helps normalize and help people recognize that there really is no normal. Being weird, being different, that is
Right.
normal.
Right, thank you, thank you. And thank you to our panelists for sharing your reflections. And we have time for questions and answers, so please utilize the Q&A function on the toolbar to submit your questions. You can submit questions anonymously if you would like to. And one of the questions that have come up, they talk about echo, and when I first arrived, I thought that fitting in meant not needing support. I learned that so many people sought social, emotional support from many areas and people on campus.
Mm-hmm.
To kind of echo some of what you all have been sharing. I went through kind of some of the same things, from family of 10. And when I came to Williams, my family was on welfare and all kinds of problems. And mental health issues run strong and deep within my family. And without realizing, that's probably what attracted me to mental health. So I eventually arrived there. But I think Williams has grown over the years in addressing some of these issues. So we all come to that campus with, our issues and all, and it's kind of resonating with a lot of the people in the audience.
I wanted to add to what you're saying, Michael, and I just remember feeling a sense of complexity anytime I was approached with the question that was so commonplace then: why do you all sit together at the Black table?
The Black table.
And it was probably, if we look at it through the lens of this call, self-care. And one of the most valuable hours, if you could sit and break bread and have a community, no matter how small, of Black students coming from all walks of life, trying to come together at a table, eat and laugh, cry, and figure it all out as young people. So that was a question that we were always hit with from just, our friends, students, and even the administration. Why do you all sit together? Self-care, free self-care.
And
Free.
Bernice, I would add that I was envious because I didn't have that community. And so we ended up creating it by incorporating all international students, but it wasn't the same. So I think that was a huge protective factor.
There's a question. Any suggestions on how to attract more BIPOC mental health providers. All capitals. Is that people of color? So anybody care to respond?
Yeah, Black, Indigenous, people of color.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it at the ground floor would be great. Obviously, the reason why the rates are so low in terms of Black providers is because, again, this stigma around Black people not needing mental health services. So in the ground floor, we are trying to do more psychoeducation and helping Black individuals recognize that this is a career path that they can take advantage of. Similarly, now I've noticed a number of platforms that are developing to help the Black community. And while there might not be as many BIPOC providers in direct relation that can come to campus, telehealth services are huge right now because it does offer diversity of care, and you can get to providers that are not necessarily within your geographic range. So there are a number of ones that are set up for certain communities, like Hurdle is set up for Black men. There's one for Black females as well. And I'm sure that we can add links to all of these as well too, but searching out for those telehealth platforms that are for your minorities can be a great way to access more BIPOC providers.
Okay, thank you. Anonymous attendee said, I'm a Williams parent and a parent of African-American children who have moderate to severe depression and anxiety. Both have been hospitalized at various times between the ages of 11 to 18 for suicidal ideation and self-harm. It has been challenging to find therapists, much less those who have the same cultural background. It has also been difficult to relate with others who don't understand the impacts of mental health because they can't see it. What are your recommendations for finding the right therapists or treatment programs, and what resources are available for family members to help those who suffer with mental health? Whoever wants to answer that.
We have a curveball.
Well, I guess. So similar to what I was saying, the telehealth services are great. There is a website called Psychology Today. You can look for providers. You can specify based on what they excel in or what they market themselves as in terms of what their specialties are. That can help in terms of finding a greater network. Similarly, again, there are a number of resources online as well too that we should definitely link up as well to help finding you those as well. Unfortunately, it's a much smaller community. As far as finding a therapist, sometimes you're not going to find someone that is the same ethnicity as you. I reckon it's kind of like dating. You have to try and just figure out what works best for you. And so it is going through a couple different ones, but also recognizing that your therapist is also a person too. And if you give them feedback in terms of what you like or dislike about treatment, that can also really help them tailor their treatment to make it more efficient for you. A lot of times people feel like you have to just kind of accept whatever your provider is giving you, but it is a relationship. And so trying to work with them and giving them that feedback can be very helpful as well.
And I would underscore that point as well, because I tell all my clients that we need a few sessions to first get to know each other. And it's, are they comfortable working with me? And also, am I comfortable working with them? And so when you look for a therapist, it has to go both ways, and it does take time. So it's not a go to a list, go to your insurance providers list and see who's closest or who looks the most similar to you.
Right.
It might actually be someone whose personality is a better fit for you, but they may not look anything like you.
Exactly. Good point.
And I would just add to that, that support groups in the community can be a good way to reach out and find an affinity with people who are going through the same kind of or similar experience. And sometimes that, recommendations come forth and having that kind of exchange.
I was going to say, NAMI is phenomenal, and they've spread out far and wide. So if there's a local NAMI group talking to parents and people going through illness, that would be also an excellent source. Here's a question. It says, have any have any of you had experience with the Latinx community? If so, how do the cultural factors compare to those you discussed for Black and South Asian communities?
So I can start off that question by saying I have worked with a lot of members of the Latinx community as college age students and as young children in the school system. And I actually find I really enjoy working with that community, and there's been a connection point there, because I think a lot of the values that these kids are raised with are very similar to how I was raised. So there's an understanding, even though we don't speak the same language. Right. And so I have found it to be a very similar experience for me personally.
Okay. Here's a personal, what from Catherine Sharp, one of our classmates, what have been your biggest challenges as minority providers and administrators? And what self-care strategies do you use during these difficult times? That hits home.
I think for me as an administrator, it's resources, it's money. You know, I look across the state of Maryland, and you're constantly battling that clarion call. You want to put that bullhorn out there and say, y'all come, but there's a finite amount of resources. So creating those partnerships and always keeping in front of you what the priorities are. Certainly food, clothing, and shelter, but we've got to reevaluate how we are looking at wellness to make sure we're pushing mental health higher on the list, so that we're not just saying food, clothing, and shelter, particularly as it pertains to the older adult community and maybe even other communities. For me, it's faith, it's meditation, it's yoga, it's music, and it's conversations, starting with my hubby of 40 years. So those are the things that keep me grounded and keep me moving forward.
Awesome. Anybody else care to share?
Sure. Yeah. Burnout is probably my biggest struggle. This past year in particular, with being a mental health provider, and then going through George Floyd as a Black individual, and then having a significant uptick in my Black patients and trying to support them, but also, all my non-Black patients also had a response to George Floyd as well. And so my job was pretty much talking about it 24/7. And then I would shut off my work computer and I would go and I would see it on my timeline. I would see it on the news. I would see it everywhere. And so for me, in addition to the number of coping skills that Bernice mentioned, it was also recognizing when I was hitting my tipping point and just unplugging, shutting off, putting in that boundary into place of saying, yep, this is it. I've hit my threshold. I need to pull back, whether that's taking time off from work, excusing myself from conversations with loved ones when I'm saying, you know what, I can't talk about this right now, limiting the amount of exposure I have to social media, whatever it may be. That's not ignorance, that's protecting my peace. And so having that insight and recognizing when I'm hitting my threshold is very important. And that's the only way I'm going to be able to survive working in this career. I
think unplugging, you said unplugging, and that's extremely crucial. You get overload. And I think a lot of that's a recommendation I give a lot of people. For me, I've pursued my hobbies, my interests more outside of my work, and that's kind of given me more balance. And so that's how I've coped, and spend more time with my family. So,
and I would say burnout has been the biggest challenge, because working remotely, it just allowed for more hours in the day to provide. And there's obviously a higher need. And that combined with all the struggles of COVID, and especially now in India, I have extended family, a lot of time in India and in other parts of the world. So trying to keep track of all those time zones and caring for people and worrying about people, that's definitely been a huge challenge in this time. But I make sure that no matter what happens, I take about an hour to an hour and a half each morning to go for a walk, meditate, and just have time alone with silence, because the rest of the day is filled with so much noise.
Absolutely. Here's a question. How can each who aren't mental health professionals help build mental health awareness amongst and across our communities? How can we build awareness in our workplaces? Thoughts?
Start with yourself. I would say talk about it. You know, be willing to be vulnerable and talk about how you feel, because it's a job for each one of us, and it starts with each one of us. And the more of us that can do that, the more common it will be, and more comfortable people will be around us. Share your stories.
I agree with that because I'll tell you, the day I got that fateful call, getting a cancer, stage 4 cancer diagnosis, I basically told my doctor, let me get my calendar, you know, I'll see if I can squeeze you in. You know, immediately following, the oncologist called and said, we need to get you in here. And I was like, well, all right, it's Wednesday. What about next Thursday? Maybe I can get you in. And she said, how about today? And that was really the first slam in the face for me that, number one, I had an urgent health need. And as the months went on, as I tried to cope and deal and fight cancer and learn how to live with it, I realized, there's some other things I need to address to be whole. So I'll tell you, you're so right in saying that the first stop is yourself, to really just take a look at the invisibility of mental health and how you don't see it in yourself until sometimes you're slammed into another health crisis or some kind of crisis. And then maybe then you hear yourself speaking a little too loudly, or being very unable to fit into a normal kind of pathway with everyone else. But it starts with you.
Starts with you.
Mm-hmm.
I'll also add to that, in terms of reaching out to your loved ones and supporting them. I found a very easy way to show up for people is changing how I check in on them. So oftentimes we say, oh, how are you? And we, more often than not, give the automatic, good, fine, you know, whatever. But if I change that question to, oh, I've had a really hectic week, what's been on your plate? Or, hey, you know, I remember you had that call, how did that go? Giving more of an open-ended question helps people actually really expand and check in on themselves and say, how am I actually doing with that? And that can oftentimes lead to a better conversation and help you support them.
We're getting close to the end. There are a lot of interesting questions. Here's one. It says, I'm a geriatric psychiatrist and I see a fair amount of older Black adults with dementia. Bernice, you maybe speak to this. I fear that any encounter with police could end in harm. How do you have the conversation with your patients and families about keeping them safe in encounters with the police?
Wow, that's awesome. You know, this is Mental Health Month. Next month, we look at elder abuse, exploitation, and neglect. These are difficult conversations, but we must have them. We have to recognize that, you know, 80 is the new 70, 70 is the new 60. Don't put that one face on the older adult. Many of them are out there driving and engaging in day-to-day activities, and need to understand where the challenges are coming in for them to be safe. And also not just in their homes, but out as they are moving about. I'd like to get that person's contact info, because I would like to just kind of provide some additional thought that might take us a half hour past our call. But
well, we have a lot of questions actually.
Yes.
We're not even gonna be able to get them all.
But absolutely, we want to make sure that older adults are just as prepared as the younger people who are out on the street and encountering as they're driving, or, you know, you get that instance of more accidents as people age and they may encounter the police a lot more. So I want to share some resources for that.
Vidisha, how do panelists, or how do you think alumni can weigh in, show up, and or assist current attendance students around mental health issues, if at all?
Well, I think mentoring is a wonderful way. So when I talk about, in general, showing up yourself, I think if alumni can find ways to connect with students, that would be really helpful, because it's that relationship, it's the relationship building. And again, with mental health, I find it's a one-on-one thing. It's not something that we can just make these sweeping changes or create large programs, which we could, but ultimately it comes down to the one-on-one interactions. So I think it's really important for alumni to find ways to come back to campus, whether remotely or in person, and
Okay.
just
Getting close to the end. Michaela, how can the college help those who have graduated with mental health issues? I believe would be the last part of that question.
Sure. I think continuing to do events like this and keeping us engaged, I find that my pride in Williams has actually grown as I've left. I think in terms of my community and wanting to give back to Williams, because I've seen how it's helped me so much in my career and my personal life. So continuing to keep us engaged with great activities like this is amazing. And also having events that we can kind of all gather around. Bernice had mentioned so much about the community aspect when you were in Williams. That same Black community for myself is my greatest group of friends now. And I love them so much. And I love any opportunity that I can to connect with them and meet new people such as yourself. So continuing to have great events like this is important.
Definitely a shout out to my support group, some on this call, but I hope in the audience as well, who we, chat regularly and work with through problems and just are there for one another. Williams is present in our home, so much so that my daughter, when she was little, she thought everybody left high school and then went on to Williams. That was her thought of it, that everybody that walked through the door was a Williams somebody or other.
Right.
But yeah.
We're going to have to close. In closing, again, I want to thank you so much, Bernice, Vidisha, and Michaela. We appreciate taking your time out of your busy schedule to share these thoughts, reflections, and personal experience and insights that have been, very powerful for me, and I'm sure for the audience. And thank you to everybody for tuning in. We hope today's sessions brought awareness around these important issues. To continue today's learning, we want to share with you that the Oakley Center will be hosting the annual Weiss Lecture on Medicine and Medical Ethics virtually this year on May 17th at 7 p.m. The talk is entitled The Ethics of Health Equity, Confronting Structural Racism in Medicine and Research. As some of you may know, Andrew B. Weiss, MD, Lecture on Medicine and Medical Ethics is an annual event hosted by the Oakley Center that memorializes the work of the late Andrew Weiss, Williams class of 1961, an orthopedic surgeon. This annual lecture promotes discussion of healthcare, broadly conceived, including economics of healthcare, as well as biomedical and ethical issues. We hope you'll consider attending that talk. Finally, just a reminder that there are more conversations, workshops, and programs across all topics as part of the Society of Alumni Bicentennial throughout this year. We hope you'll engage as you're able. Thanks for joining. Take care of yourselves, everybody. We appreciate the questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but this has been very stimulating and rewarding for me. So any last words from the panelists?
Keep protecting your peace.
Huh?
Keep protecting your peace. Take care of yourself and your loved ones.
All right, I agree.
Take time out. Take a time out.
Keep the conversation going.
And it starts with yourself.
Right.
I like that. All right. Thank you, everybody. I
Bye-bye.
think that's it.
Thank you. Thank you
All
to
right.
Williams.
Thank you.